Today I'm going to test out the gyro data from my A7C and Catalyst browse. I want to know if it's an actual practical gimbal alternative, as everyone seems to be suggesting. Now, I've watched quite a few reviews where people have used this gyro data and Catalyst browse, and they kind of call it a gimbal killer, or the end of gimbals, or no need for a gimbal anymore. So I wanted to know if this was actually the case. I think Casey over at Camera Conspiracies was the only one that really didn't like it. Everyone else seemed to rave about it. Now, I've used it for a couple of months and I wanted to show you the few issues that I've found, and I'll cover those a little bit later in the video. Since the A7S III and the A7C came out, there has been a lot of talk about this gyroscopic data saved in the video files. What it basically does is record how the camera sits in 3D space. So in theory, you can stabilize your footage in this program Catalyst browse that Sony have created. The gyro data is also available on the RX0 Mark II, the FX9, and also the ZV-1. Although with the ZV-1, it's such a tight angle already that I don't know how effective that would be, as it does really crop in on your frame. Now, I've been using the A7C for a few months and I've filmed a few pieces with a view to using the gyro data in Catalyst browse to give me nice smooth footage without the hassle of a gimbal. So I'm going to put a shot side by side. So I've got the stabilized one and the unstabilized. I've got the IBIS off. I'm at 1/640th of a second shutter speed. f2.8 ISO 100. So we'll see what these are like side by side. This is a really simple way of filming because you kind of just have to carry the camera, have a microphone on the top, you've just got a tripod on the bottom, and that's it. First of all, there are a few things to know before filming. You can't use the IBIS, and this has to be turned off. You need to use faster shutter speeds so there's no motion blur to mess up the footage. When filming, you do need to think about the end result and shoot with a wider angle lens because of that crop when it does stabilize, and especially if there's lots of movement. The more movement you have in the frame, or the more shaky your hands are, the more it will crop in when you're shooting that footage. When you are shooting with longer focal lengths, the movements in your hands will become accentuated. So the longer the lens that you're filming with, the more it will tend to crop in when it is stabilizing in Catalyst browse. You do need plenty of processing power as well, as it will make your computer work for it. Also, it doesn't save any gyro data with a super slow-mo. Once you realize these 5 points, you can get some great footage with these cameras shooting handheld. However, if you've got any experience in filming, you'll already know some of the downfalls of this system. Straight away, with setting up the camera so there's no motion blur by using shutter speeds of 1/100th of a second or faster, and a lot faster if there's a lot of motion in your shots, this is kind of taking away from that 180-degree shutter rule. Now, if this is important to you and your film aesthetic, this is a no-go area, so it's back to the trusty gimbal for you cinematographers. Also, as I've already mentioned, if you need to shoot on a telephoto lens, it is harder to get a steady shot handheld. And Catalyst browse does crop in a lot on your frame if your hands aren't really steady. But in saying that, it does do a really good job at getting rid of most of the motion and the rolling shutter issues. If you look at these two shots taken on an 85mm and a full frame camera side by side, you can see that there's so much motion when it's not stabilized, and then you can see how much Catalyst browse has actually stabilized it. I was really surprised when shooting this footage. I thought it wouldn't come out that good at all. There is a lot of crop, but that's to be expected with that much movement. And because of all of that movement, it did make most of these clips unusable. But if this was combined with a gimbal, you could easily get some really good telephoto shots with an 85mm lens, and they would be really usable. So the ones I've mentioned are the obvious drawbacks to stabilizing your footage like this, but there are a few more that I've found that might make you think twice about using the gyro data, as well as a few benefits. When I'm out and about filming with a view to stabilizing in post, it is great. You can have a full frame camera just on a small tripod or a gorilla pod, and you can walk with it, you can talk to camera, get B-roll, all with this really compact system. And most people will think you're just one of those camera geeks, not a fully fledged cinematographer. So if you have IBIS on and you stick to that 180-degree shutter rule, this is what happens. Will actually be interesting to see how the Catalyst browse copes with this. Literally just walking along, I've got the camera on a little tripod. So now I've turned IBIS off, but I'm still following the 180-degree shutter rule. I've got the camera on a little tripod. I'm going to put this through Catalyst browse just to see what it looks like. Now I've turned IBIS off, I've taken the filter off, and I'm shooting at 1/320th of a second. So I'm going to put Catalyst browse on this and see how it stabilizes. I've had to shoot wider, and also I'm holding the camera further away from me because I know that Catalyst browse program will crop in on the image. So it'll be interesting to see how it copes with this. Bit of sunshine. Next, I'm running with the camera and you can really see the effects from the motion blur. This is caused by shooting at 25 frames a second and having a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. So after doing these tests, if there's a lot of movement, you have to really raise your shutter speed. The more movement, the higher it has to be. But for relatively steady shots, it's not as important as you might think, so don't stress if you forget to change it. However, you always need to be thinking about the crop. This means filming in 4K for the best resolution when it does crop in on your frame, and not getting your subject too close to your edges. So if you're a vlogger, you need to keep the top of your head away from the top of the frame, and the camera probably further away from you so you're a bit smaller in the frame. So when it does crop in, it's not just head and shoulders. Again, if you're filming B-roll, you've got to keep the subject away from the edges. This can be easily forgotten, and if you've been a videographer for a long time, you might have that muscle memory of checking the frame and watching how your frame looks and seeing what's in the edges so you get it right in camera instead of filming wider than you should. I found this pretty hard to adapt to, and a lot of the times when editing it would crop in more than I wanted it to. You can select the amount of crop, but the less you crop in, the less it stabilizes the footage. Now it does stabilize every video setting apart from 100 frames per second in PAL and 120 frames per second in NTSC. With these, it doesn't even save the gyro data in the first place, so Catalyst Browse has no data to work with. With all of the other settings, it does save the data though. So in XAVC 4K, XAVC HD, 60, 50, 30, 25 and 24 frames per second, I was able to stabilize all of the footage in those settings. So as long as you're not shooting super slow-mo, then you'll be able to use Catalyst Browse to stabilize your footage. My laptop is a 2.9 GHz quad-core i7 with 16 GB of RAM and a Radeon Pro 560 4GB video card. And like all Macs nowadays, the SSD is soldered to that motherboard. And then I use an external SSD drive through a USB-C port. So there are very few bottlenecks in this system. To analyze the clip, it didn't take too long, but to render the stabilized footage with this setup for a 13-second clip, I was having to wait 1 minute and 15 seconds to get the finished video. Now for this whole test video, I did film around about 30 minutes of B-roll in total. So that would give me about 3 hours of processing time, and that seemed about right when I was editing this video. When I have used Catalyst Browse and the Gyro Data, I've ended up cutting the piece together with the original shots and then stabilizing these shots I used in the final edit afterwards, so I didn't end up stabilizing all of the footage, just the shots that I've used. I was literally writing down the names of the files, bringing them into Catalyst Browse from my hard drive, stabilizing them in that program, and then swapping them out in Premiere Pro afterwards. Also in Catalyst Browse, you can't bulk stabilize, so you are stuck in front of your computer processing each and every file. Now it would be great if Premiere Pro or Final Cut could utilize this data for use with, say, Warp Stabilizer or something similar. Having it integrated into the editing program would be so much better than having to switch between the two different programs. Also, I've had a few times where Catalyst Browse couldn't complete the task. It said there was not enough metadata, which kind of sucks. Although, on the previous version of Catalyst Browse, the program would literally just crash. Whereas at least now, with the latest version, it tells me that there's not enough data. For me, it seemed to fail with longer clips with lots of movement. So say for instance, I was filming something, but I didn't turn it off, and then I moved around really quickly, or I dropped it to look straight down and back up and filmed another clip, this is when it really did fail. So sometimes you might get your footage home, have a shot that you really like, but then Catalyst Browse rejects it, saying that there's not enough metadata. Then, because there's no IBIS on the footage, you've got all of the micro movements from your hands, you can only really stabilize it in Warp Stabilizer or in Final Cut. And with Warp Stabilizer, you do get that jello footage, and any big movements in your shot will kind of look worse than they did to start with. So even though it's great that the camera companies are thinking in this way, it's still quite primitive, and it would be great to see them develop this further. And it would be even better to have this in camera like the active stabilization in the A7S III, but a much more refined version to enable us to keep using the 180-degree shutter rule and be able to see what the framing is whilst filming, instead of shooting wider and cropping in post. When it comes to getting really stable footage, there's nothing better than a gimbal. I'm shooting this now on the Fadetech A7C, and it is keeping a nice steady shot, and most gimbals will do that. It's a mechanical way of stabilizing out any motion from your arm and your hand. So for now, because of the much longer workflow that I've found, and the footage being not quite as good as with a gimbal, I think I'll be continuing to use my gimbal. And even though it's a bit of a workout whilst filming, it does give much better footage right out of camera to work with, instead of shaky footage with a much longer workflow and the possibility of losing some of those clips when Catalyst Browse does fail. Now, what do you think? Have you ever used it with any success, or are you sticking with your gimbal? Or maybe you use both for super smooth footage? Let me know in the comments below. It'll be great to hear your thoughts. And if you like this one, click here next. Or if you're a binge watcher like me, click down here for a load of my tutorials. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for 2 videos a week in photography and videography. I'll see you next time.